And that is one of the reasons Isaiah says what he says here. But notice Isaiah chapter 6 and verse number 5, because I believe Isaiah understood this concept of fearing the Lord. He says, "For I am undone, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips, for my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts." Did you catch that last part there? You say, well, I can relate to Isaiah, right? I'm a man of unclean lips. Well, if you knew some of the things that I've done in my life, you would shudder to think that I'm standing before you today. I can relate to what Isaiah says, but notice the reason Isaiah says it. Woe is me, I'm a man of unclean lips. I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. That's what he says, because he knows of the greatness of God. He knows that the Lord is one to be feared. It's also seen in the life of Peter, though. In Luke chapter 5 and verse number 8, Peter says something similar. The Bible there says that when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees and said, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord." You say, well, what does that mean? It doesn't mean a whole lot if you don't know why Peter said it. That statement was made immediately after the miraculous catch of fish. You remember Peter and his friends, they've been out fishing all night and hadn't caught a thing. And as they're making their way back to shore, Jesus tells them, he says, "Let down your nets one more time." And they do so, but with a lot of apprehension. They say, "Well, we've been at this all night, Lord. Are you sure you want us to do that? But nevertheless, at your will, we will." And they let the nets down, and they catch so many fish that the boat begins to sink. And it was that power and the spirit that Christ displayed there to them that caused Peter to say, "I am a sinful man, O Lord, depart from me." You see, that's the fear of the Lord. But I also want you to know today that the fear of the Lord is not just an idea. You see, the fear of the Lord is something that should alter your life, and it should alter mine as well. Notice in Psalm 34 from our scripture we're studying this morning that the psalmist connects this idea of fearing the Lord with keeping our lips from evil and the fact that we are going to seek peace and pursue it. We're not going to speak deceit. You may not know a lot about Nehemiah. He was one of the reformers that was responsible for helping God's people get back to their homeland. But here's what I know about Nehemiah. In chapter 5 and verse number 15, the Bible there says, "But the former governors," this is Nehemiah speaking, "the former governors who were before me laid burdens on the people and took from them bread and wine, besides 40 shekels of silver. Yes, even their servants bore rule over the people." He's saying to the people, look, you remember what kind of life you have lived. You remember how you were treated. And then Nehemiah says this at the end of verse 15. "But I did not do so because of the fear of God." You see, the fear of the Lord is something that altered the course of Nehemiah's life. It wasn't just an idea that he had in his mind that was a good idea. It was something that changed his behavior. And I have no doubt that the same was true about Job. In Job chapter 1 and verse number 1, we're introduced to him when he says that there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, a man that was blameless and upright, and one who feared God and shunned evil. Job's fear of God is something that altered his behavior. And therefore the wise man would say in Proverbs 3 and verse number 7, "Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and depart from evil." Fear the Lord and depart from evil. Now those are two things, and those are not the only two things, but two things in Psalm 34 that signify our trust in God. They characterize our trust in God. Here's question number 2 today, and I'll try to move through these rather quickly. Question number 2 today is, what are the consequences of trusting in God? Bearing in mind, of course, that consequences can be both good or bad, positive or negative. What are the consequences of trusting in God? Number 1, salvation. Go back to Psalm 34 and let's read a few verses here, verses 4 through 7. The psalmist there says, I sought the Lord and He heard me. He delivered me from all my fears, and they looked to Him and were radiant, and their faces were not ashamed. This poor man cried out, and the Lord heard him and saved him out of all his troubles. The angel of the Lord encamps all around those who fear Him and delivers them. Then verses 17 and 18. The righteous cry out, and the Lord hears and delivers them out of all their troubles. The Lord is near to those who have a broken heart and saves such as have a contrite spirit. And then verse 22. The Lord redeems the soul of His servants, and none of those who trust in Him shall be condemned. We're talking about salvation here. The truth is this morning, if you trust God, and by that I do not mean this morning that you just something that you say. It's not just agreeing to this fact that Jesus is the Son of God or that God does reign supreme. It's not that. If you truly trust in God, salvation awaits. We see over and over again David extolling the beauty of salvation that God had provided for him. Remember, he's running for his life. He's hungry. He's afraid. He doesn't know what he's going to do or where he's going to go. And he says, God delivered me. God saved me. The psalmist mentions many different people and or situations through which God delivered those who fear Him. In hand with salvation. It has. It's not the only thing that God has ever required, but it does go hand in hand with salvation. For instance, Moabites. Do you remember them stranded between the Red Sea and the army of Pharaoh? They don't know where they're going to go. They've just come out of Egypt. And they begin to complain against Moses. They said, well, look, Moses, you brought us out here to die. We've nowhere to go. The Red Sea on one hand, the Egyptian army coming in behind us. We would have rather stayed in Egypt. At least we would have been full. But it was the trust of Moses and those who would follow him to do something that had never been done before. When that sea was parted in two and the Israelites walked through it on dry ground, the fact that he and they eventually would trust God to do what